Well, hello and welcome to the Movie Paradise. I am your host, Nathanael Molnár, and this is our Ready Player One spoiler discussion. If you have not seen the movie, don't watch this video. You can go over to themovieparadise.com and check out a spoiler-free review over there. But this is all spoilers. We're getting into everything in the movie, so if you've not seen the film, do not watch this video. Today, I am joined by a great panel, actually. To my left, we have Matt.
Hello.
And we have Connor over here.
Hi.
So, let's just get into it. I think we'll just talk off the cuff about what we liked about this movie, because I think overall we liked the movie, right?
Yeah, I liked the movie very much.
So, Connor, what were some of your first thoughts?
So it should be established right away that I read the book.
Yes.
And I went into it with expectations based on the book. I wasn't looking for it to be shot for shot a remake of the book. I was looking for something that would have the same adventurous spirit and be a very visual, very exciting, version of what I read. And it was that. I liked it very much. It was the action-packed, fun adventure full of cool shots that I wanted it to be. That was really what I was looking for, because there was so much that could be represented well in film through all the special effects that I knew were going to be put into it.
Yeah.
So that was what I was looking for. That was what I got. That's my first impression, really.
Matt, first impression.
Yeah, relatively the same thing coming from reading the book as well. I really didn't have any concerns of how well they stayed to the story or whether they included stuff or not. I was really wanting them to take advantage of film having the visual aspect. And the book really does lend itself to be on the big screen, so it's definitely the most important thing for me, and it did very well.
Yeah, so first impressions for me, unlike you two, I did not read the book.
Yeah.
So I was more looking at it as this is a Steven Spielberg movie, who is one of the greatest filmmakers to ever live, and certainly one of the best working right now in the business. So I was very excited about that. From the trailers, I was really looking forward to the movie, and I thought it sounded like a really cool concept, and there was a lot of really cool things you could do with that. But it looked a little too big. It looked a little too wild and zany, and I didn't know if you could take all these wide-reaching concepts and all these really out-there concepts and make it a cohesive and coherent film. If anyone could do that, it would be Steven Spielberg. So it had that going for it. But I was starting to get nervous that maybe this wouldn't work in the way that we were hoping it would work out. That maybe it would just kind of fall apart and it would be a mess of a film. But I was dead wrong.
Yeah.
And I was hoping it was going to be good. I didn't expect it to be as good as it was. I walked out loving this movie. I just thought everything they pulled off, from the story they told to what they accomplished visually to how they take all the references and weave it into the actual narrative, as opposed to just throwing out references for the sake of them being references. I just thought overall what Spielberg did was just masterclass, and it just shows, this is just proof that he has not lost anything that he has. He is still one of the best, and this film is just further proof of that.
Definitely.
I remember it must have been 2015, I think, when I saw the very first announcement that there would be a Ready Player One movie, and the Steven Spielberg was definitely the sort of thing I was hanging on to, the thing that made me feel, okay, I can be excited about this.
Yeah.
I can believe that this is going to turn out good, years later.
Yeah. I remember my first book that I read that I saw the movie version of, and it was Percy Jackson, and I was so incredibly disappointed that I'm always a little bit wary going into those, especially when I have read and loved the book.
Yeah.
So don't see the second movie. It was worse.
Well, it was bad enough that they didn't make a third one.
Exactly.
So let's get into the positives of this movie, and there's certainly a lot of positives, and I think most of this discussion is going to be the positives. Connor, would you like to start us off?
Sure. So like I said, the first thing I was looking for were visuals, and there were plenty of amazing visuals, from the flyover of the Oasis in the very beginning.
Yes, that was awesome.
To the coins falling out of people when they died, to, in the very end, this is a huge spoiler, so if you've somehow stayed in the the video this long,
Yeah, this is when we're really getting into spoilers. You've had some cushion time.
When IROC dies and all of his guns and weapons fall out and in a pile, I love the way that looks.
He's like picking it up.
He's scooping it back in.
Yeah. And Matt, you had something you were talking to me about the other day. Your favorite part?
Oh, the Sixers stations.
Yeah. How
they are white and then they're represented red when they die, and how the way the light moves is perfectly representative of how they died.
Yeah.
The railgun just shoots through a bunch of them, and then they all go red, and then the falling.
Mm-hmm. Something fell on them.
Not T-Rex.
The
Mechagodzilla. There you go.
That was a great scene. The two best sequences, I'd say, were the opening race scene, which just right off the bat it just gets you. Because I was watching, you have a whole bunch of exposition, which it's really neat what they're doing visually with that. But it's really that race scene. Once you start getting into that, you just see how insane this is. You have T-Rexes, you have Godzilla, you have King Kong at that point. Godzilla comes later, or Mechagodzilla. You have King Kong, you have T-Rexes, you have, all this shit is just going on. And I'm just sitting there in the theater what is going on? There's so much stuff.
What have I gotten myself into?
But it's a good feeling. It was so exhilarating, and just I felt my heart pounding, and I just had this grin on my face that I couldn't get rid of.
Yeah.
That was such a great way to introduce the audience into this film, and it just really gives you a sense of, all right, this is what this world is. This is what it's like. It's just craziness and throwing everything at you, and try to make sense of it if you can, but not in a sloppy way. In a very well-crafted way. And you get that again with the final battle, where you have all these characters just fighting each other. You see Ninja Turtles, you see the Halo guys, you see a whole bunch of just all these different things coming together. And you had Mechagodzilla. As soon as Ben Mendelsohn's character gets into that and he starts becoming Mechagodzilla, I was like, oh shit, we're in for it. This is going to be awesome.
Definitely.
It feels so ridiculous saying Mechagodzilla, but it makes so much sense in the context.
Yes.
Anything you want, so nothing is weird. Everything makes total sense.
Exactly, and I love when movies have that little bit of mythology that allows them to pretty much do anything they want.
You're right.
You get that that's one of my biggest pros with The Matrix, is just by a little bit of mythology weaving, they suddenly open up they can do anything. Yeah. And it all makes sense, and it's all within the context of what they've established. And Ready Player One does that perfectly. It establishes you can be anyone, you can do anything, and suddenly endless possibilities. There's endless selection of what you can do in this world, and as filmmaker, what you can do with the film. And they enable themselves and put them in such a perfect position to do something like Mechagodzilla versus the Iron Giant. Yeah. You can have that, and it makes complete sense, and it's not distracting at all. And that's just, it's incredible what they're able to do with this film.
I also loved the way H's workshop looked. Everything about that design was very nice, and the way that the vehicles would shrink and go into your inventory, which was in front of you, which was another. I loved that inventory popping up in front of you.
I love that whole exchange where he's looking at the car and it's completely told him. He's like, "Yeah, I could do in 10 minutes."
Yeah, that was great. There were definitely some very good, funny moments. I am remembering.
It's fucking Chucky. That was the best line. Line.
I'm remembering one from the very beginning where they're describing how if you zero out, you can come back, but all your stuff is gone, and so it's like losing all of your stuff because you spend all your time there. And they just show a bunch of people getting mad at it, and one guy almost jumps out a window and
it's tackled.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a really funny sequence, and it's great how they edit it together. But it also just gives you a sense of how real this is for people, and especially the scene afterwards where the step-uncle, I guess? Step-dad?
Oh, no, because
it was with his aunt. So step-uncle.
Okay. Yeah.
Where he, takes all the mortgage money and puts it into the game. So it did a really good job of showing just how hooked people were on this and how part of their lives and how integrated it was.
Definitely.
And I think some of the more telling scenes and shots were when all you saw were people on the streets with the Oasis headgear.
Yeah.
Just running around and acting out in the game. And it just kind of shows you how everyone's like so completely inside of this thing as opposed to interacting with the world around them.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the biggest messages of the film I found, was this whole talking about how absorbed we are within technology that it's making it harder for us to connect with other human beings. And I thought that was very prevalent with how it depicted the Oasis. And especially you have that scene with Artemis and Parzival where she's saying, you've lived your entire life in the Oasis. You don't know anything about the outside world. I thought that was a very strong message, and especially by the end when you have that whole scene in the bedroom with Halliday, just where Halliday is talking to Parzival. I really felt that, where I think, what was it Halliday specifically said? He said something like, real life is the only thing that's real, or something like
Reality
that. It was
is the only thing that's real.
Yeah, it was something like that, and that just, it's a simple phrase, but it means so much for the story, that you can't accomplish, no matter what you create, no matter what you build within this oasis, nothing can come close to what the real world is and what that holds. And I think in many ways it's a cautionary tale as to where we're heading in a society, that we become so fixated in and live so entirely within this virtual world that we cannot communicate and connect with people outside of that. That is our only way we socially survive. That is the only way we socially thrive. And I thought that was very striking. And it was this deeper message of the film that I wasn't expecting. And for what I saw from the trailers, I just assumed it was going to be some big flashy thing. And I thought it was going to be very well done for that. But I wasn't expecting a more profound message to come out of that. And so that was something that really I was taken by. And I think that's something you get by having a director like Steven Spielberg behind the helm, in that you'll get something that visually is stunning and incredible and takes visual effects work to the next level and is unlike anything you've ever seen before on screen. You'll also have really great characters, a very strong narrative, and a very profound message. And I think that's what makes this a total package.
I think also a message that I latched onto, aside from that, was this message of kind of, it was sort of like, you can do anything you want. Like, I know that it was within the context of the Oasis, but there was very much you have the power to do these things. And despite the fact that there is this company that has, millions of dollars of profit to specifically do this one thing, you still have the power to beat them. I think that is very often the goal of young adult novels and their subsequent movies, to empower young people, and I feel like that was very well done in this film, because
it didn't feel preachy. None of the messages in this film felt preachy, which is something that a lot of movies just in general, forget even book adaptations, movies in general can have a problem of feeling too preachy, or they, drive in their message too hard to the point where you're like, all right, I get it. I get what you're trying to say. But I never felt that with this. It never felt like it took it to the extreme or it took it a step too far. It all felt like it was subtle enough that it wasn't overbearing, but it was prevalent enough that I understood what it was trying to say.
I have a slight issue with that, but I'll get to that later. Just, nitpicky stuff.
All right. Matt, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, a lot of my favorite parts of the movie are actually things that they changed from the book, mainly being the whole concept of the curator being a character in the archives.
Spoilers for the book, by the way.
Yeah. Have the carrier being a character, because in the book it was just, I don't remember really why he was there, but it wasn't a challenge. I think he was going there for research or something, but there was I'm pretty sure it was Pac-Man, and he just had to get a perfect score in Pac-Man, which of course had some relation back to the challenge as a whole. But he got a perfect score, and they gave him this quarter. And he's like, oh, I'm sure this is going to be useful later, puts it in his pocket, and you never really hear about it again.
Yeah.
But they actually give that extra life, and the extra life is used in the exact same way, but it means so much more because it wasn't just something he got, it was given to him. The fact that he was being watched over by...
Morrow, is it?
Ogden Morrow.
Og, yeah. Yeah. The fact that Og was watching him the whole time really gave
Yeah.
that whole moment so much more meaning. And
Yeah, no, definitely.
Extra life definitely felt earned this time instead
Yeah.
of just being something that you forgot about and then came back.
Yeah, that definitely, from the way you described it, it sounds like they did a better job of that with the movie, and especially tying in with, was it Og? Og. Okay. Og. You know, the way they tied that in with Simon Pegg, which I'm really glad that they included that whole part about him being the curator. Because I felt like it was a little bit of a waste for Simon Pegg. Like, he was there, and he was really good for a couple scenes, and then he was just gone. Mm-hmm. So I like that they brought him back. Yeah, and usually, like, sometimes I can predict that kind of thing. Like, oh, of course, you know, they have a big actor for this tiny role. Obviously, he's going to have something to do at the very end. Mm-hmm. But that wasn't something... I didn't even see that coming. Simon Pegg shows up at the very end, and then he reveals he's the curator. I was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. I don't know how I didn't see that coming.
Yeah.
Also, if anyone who's read the book probably noticed that, like, the first 8 chapters of the book are just non-existent in the movie at all.
Yeah.
And what consists of the first 8 chapters?
The first chapters is really Parsifal on, like, a school planet where all the kids go to school in the Oasis.
Yep.
And the first challenge is he has to go into this cave that's on the school planet, and that's why no one had found it. And then...
So it wasn't the race?
No, the race wasn't... I don't think none of the challenges were the same.
I think the third challenge
the third
was, or at least very similar.
The third challenge was the Rush album.
Was it?
Yeah.
Wasn't that I thought that was the second.
The second one was... Or maybe it was the point-and-click adventure was the second one.
Adventure, the game? Or?
No, it was like there was a complex of a bunch of houses that were all playing this same click adventure, this like point-and-click game. And then I'm pretty sure the last one was the Rush album in the book. But this one was we had the race, we had the Shining, and we had...
I think it sounds like... I think it was for the better what they did with the movie, because it lends itself to more visual. Like, the race is very visual heavy. The Shining, I loved that whole sequence. Yeah. I know you're not a fan of The Shining, and yes, I'm not gonna... I'm definitely bringing that up for this.
Yeah.
But I really liked visually what they did with that. Mm-hmm. And just, you know, as soon as the twins showed up and H started going to the elevator, I was thinking, oh shit, yeah. I know exactly. Like, literally, I
can relate with
person
H
sitting
so
next to me in the theater, when as soon as he saw that, he goes, oh no. And, like, I think everyone collectively in the theater knew exactly where it was going.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's perfect. Yeah. It's perfect for that.
I do have to say I missed the first challenge a little bit, but all 3 of the challenges in the movie I think were very well done, very well suited to the movie. The first challenge I think would have worked very visually, but it was such an obscure reference and they couldn't really explain it.
And I don't think it would have been as visually, like, it wouldn't lend itself to being visual as much as the race, because the race is very visually driven.
I think it would have been, it just wouldn't have been as exciting.
Yeah, I felt like that was the best way to start the movie. Mm-hmm. Like, I think that was the best way. Like I said, you have a bunch of exposition, setting the groundwork and explaining things, but that race is really what hooks you.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely jumping in at the very beginning was a good idea.
You're right.
I don't know how they would have done the school planet.
Yeah.
See, and I think
that would have taken way too long.
That's part of something that filmmakers really have to do, and I think you have... I'm not saying this is you guys, because I know very well you don't think this way, either of you. But I think there are a lot of people out there who say, when a book is being adapted into a movie, the book, it has to be exactly what's in the page. It has to be literally beat for beat, letter for letter, word for word, exactly what's in the book has to be in the movie. And there's also an unfair expectation put on the movie that what I imagined from this book has to be what the movie is. And if it deviates from that, which is, it's impossible for it to completely line up with how you're thinking because it's in your own head. Everyone imagines what the characters look like and how the worlds look. Everyone imagines that differently. So there's no way for the movie to please everybody. Yeah. But I think a lot of readers, and again, not you two, but a lot of people will read a book, and when it comes to the movie, they'll put unfair expectations on the movie. That it has to be exactly the book, and it has to be exactly how I imagined everything.
Yeah.
And that just isn't possible. And so the job of the filmmaker is to take the book, find what works best, what doesn't work, cut out what doesn't work, heighten what does work, and add what else needs to be in there in order to heighten the really good parts of that book.
Definitely.
And I think this is a great example of a great adaptation, where you take parts of the book Ready Player One, the really strong parts, which are the characters and a lot of plot points and the overall idea of what's going on. And I don't know much about like the themes and the messages of the book itself, but I would assume there is some crossover.
Definitely.
They're pretty
So-
similar. Yeah.
So taking those elements and then cutting out a lot of the fluff and the fat of the book, that the book can do that because it's a book. You have a lot more room and a lot more time to be able to go off onto side plots and do all this detail that a movie can't, because you've got 2 hours or 2 hours and 20 minutes in the case of Ready Player One to tell all this information, so you need to condense it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So taking all that extra stuff from the book, cutting it out to getting to the bare basics of it in the film.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, again, I haven't read the book, but it sounds like this is a prime example of a really great adaptation of taking a book and turning it into a film.
Yeah, definitely. One thing that was very striking to me, they cut out an entire subplot of the book that made a lot of sense because it would have taken too long if they had tried to include it. You just can't represent the amount of time that
This
passed.
is The Rush?
No.
Oh.
Although the Rush thing did take a lot longer than the movie would have allowed. But what I'm talking about is, I believe between the first and second key, this is right after he finds the first key, when he moves to the apartment.
I think you might be right.
Okay. I'm relatively certain, and it doesn't matter to the theme that much. Basically, from the fame and money that he gets from finding this first key, he is able to move to an apartment and buy a special new suit and get super heavy-duty security so that nobody can come in or see him or know where he's living.
Yeah.
And he has like food delivered through a slat in the door. He basically just becomes this antisocial. He gets very overweight, and at some point he corrects that, but that isn't that important to the actual story.
Yeah, and again, I think that's going back to, they took what were the basics of that,
Yeah.
and just cut out all that extra stuff that would have deviated from the driving narrative.
And I think it was definitely a good decision because I don't think that story point would have worked, but I did a little bit miss the themes of becoming famous, becoming rich, and alienating yourself from your friends as a result of that.
Yeah, they definitely had him becoming rich and famous. Well, not so much rich. Well, a little bit rich, but more famous.
Yeah.
Like when he would walk into places, everyone wanted to take pictures
Yeah.
with him. They didn't have him alienating himself from his friends, which I thought was fine.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you took time to set that up, then you have to take time away from something else in the film. And what would you take time away from? Dude, everything else is so perfectly put together. I don't know if I'd want to take something else away from that.
I don't have a suggestion for it. I didn't think it made the movie itself suffer. It was just something that, as a person who read the book...
It was an interesting concept.
I really liked that theme. It was an important part of the book to me, and so when it was missing, it was a little bit... That was the one thing that I would say I missed from the book.
Yeah.
So...
Any other basic positives we want to get into before we move on to the negatives?
I don't think
It's
so.
just there's so many. I could point out so many small things I liked, but not.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, there was one thing I wanted to talk about. You talked about earlier how the references were never just kind of thrown in. They always had some important part of the story.
Yeah.
I disagree with that. There were a few that were thrown in. They were just kind of there.
Well, I mean, they, like, not overtly. Like, I felt like it was, like, background stuff. Like, it wasn't... It was never, like, thrown in your face. It was never, like, shoving it down your throat.
That was one of the things... Yeah. That was one of the things that I liked a lot about the movie. They had so many characters that people would recognize, but never, like, thrown in your face. There were never characters that was like, hey, look at me, I'm Tracer from Overwatch.
Yeah.
Just pay me money. Come see this movie because Tracer from Overwatch is in it.
It's the only Overwatch character he knows.
Were there other Overwatch characters?
You wouldn't know.
You're right.
No, but like Rooster Teeth's Ruby,
Yeah.
he confirmed on like their podcast that he like sent they signed over the rights so they could use her. I didn't see her.
Yeah.
I really want to see her in it, but I don't know where she is.
Yeah, so like even if you're looking for a character, sometimes you won't see them. They're very subtle.
See, but that's a good thing.
Definitely.
Like it would have been different if they're like, "Hey, you know Minecraft? We got Minecraft. Look at this. You know this brand. You love this brand. You use it. Minecraft." They weren't. It wasn't like that. It was like, "Oh, look, there's that logo as you fly over it, and it's barely visible for 3 seconds."
Yeah.
Like that's how you do it. And then you have big important ones like the Iron Giant, but that's a character within the film.
Definitely.
It has a very specific purpose. All the references are there just to be there. It's not like the one that felt like they were like, "Hey, look at this," was when they were going, "You can mountain climb with Batman," and it showed Batman. That was the one time I was like, "That feels like they're like, look, Batman." But that was just a second, like, and it was gone.
And honestly, that felt like just the kid being excited about Batman.
Yeah, so that still works within the context of the film.
Yeah.
None of this felt like product placement.
Definitely.
It had a very specific purpose. And even ones that were there for more than just a second were woven into the actual narrative and actually meant something to the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, and that's another thing about this film, is that there's so much to go through in this movie. There's so many. I cannot wait to get the Blu-ray to just be able to pause every single frame by frame, and just look at everything, and be like, okay, there's that. I didn't even see that. It's one of those movies where you'll pick up on things 5th, 6th, 7th, even like 20th, 21st, 23rd time you're watching it. You're still gonna pick up new things because there's just so much there, and it's so rich in that sense. So moving on to the negatives. I personally don't have that many. I don't know about you, Matt. Connor, what are some of your negatives?
I also don't have I don't have a lot of negatives. I do have a lot of specific things. Mm-hmm. They are not big parts of the movie, though. So
yeah. So it's more nitpicky stuff.
Yeah, I suppose I do have a lot, of negatives numerically. I have a large number of negatives. They're just small negatives. Mm-hmm. So my first biggest negative is I felt occasionally like they said a lot of things instead of showing them. Mm-hmm. They said his biggest fear was kissing a girl, and that felt really strange. And then at the very end, they said something like, "So we shut it off on Tuesdays and Thursdays because you guys have to go outside. You can't live your whole life inside a machine. That's the plot of the movie. Go home."
Those didn't really bother me. I mean, could they have done that a little bit better? Yeah. But it wasn't something I was sitting in the theater like, my experience with Ready Player One is ruined because they said this. It just kind of like...
Tuesdays and Thursdays? Those are my days off! Fuck!
It didn't really bother me. Going back to... But the idea of they said a lot, that was one of the things, when I saw it the second time, I realized how much exposition there is. Mm-hmm. Because the first viewing, the exposition was all stuff I needed to know. Mm-hmm. So it didn't really bother me at all. The second time, I still understand why there's all this exposition, but basically the very beginning of the film is just straight exposition explaining everything.
Yeah.
Which... makes sense. You need that because this is a very complicated and complex world. There's a lot of things the audience needs to know going in. Mm-hmm. So I understand why. But that was something that really stuck out to me was, oh wow, there's a lot of exposition.
There was another thing in the exposition. This was a line that bothered me more than the other two, and I can't believe I forgot to mention it. But at some point he said, "We're basically living in a world where people ignore their problems instead of trying to solve them."
I like that line a lot. Because I think it helped set the stage for what this world was like. And I thought, we had a conversation before about whether this was a dystopian future. Yeah. And I thought that really, because it didn't go into a lot of detail on what the actual real world looked like, but I thought that line was very, it helped me understand what the world looked like. And so, because, we live in a time where there's a lot of debate over what to do and how to act, and, you have very specific points of views on how to do things. And so by them saying that, they just said, pretty much people just gave up. It was every man for himself. We stopped trying to fix problems. We stopped trying to advocate for our morals and what we stand for. Different issues that divide us, we stopped, what side you're on, people stopped advocating for what they believed and just tried to survive. And I thought that spoke to, it was an instance for me personally where tell not show worked. Was you didn't need to show, do a whole montage of what the real world looked like. All they had to say was people stopped trying to solve problems and just tried to survive them. And I knew everything about this world that I needed to know.
I think it really is shown. I think the Stacks is a really good example of they just stopped caring. They really just piled things on top of each other to make them work. And especially the whole sequence with him, how does he get down? He goes through other people's houses. He has to slide down ropes.
Yeah.
He gets to the very bottom and he sees the same old lady who you're assuming he sees every day on his weird downwards commute.
Yeah.
And that really shows they're just throwing stuff together because the outside world doesn't matter.
That's exactly why I think that he shouldn't have said it the way he did, because I think that what they showed was a lot, it gave that impression.
It was really showing how he sees the world. We were getting his personal views, not really the overall.
The one thing I'll say is that I thought that did a really good job of showing his reality in that one town, but I thought that line gave a global sense. When I said they didn't do a montage or anything, I was talking about more they didn't show what the whole world looked like. I mean, they did a little bit, but that was more specific to the Oasis and how people used the Oasis. They didn't go around this is how government works. This is how the economy works now. They didn't show what the whole world looks like. They showed his reality in that one town, and then they said two things. They said, one, that was the most developed town in the whole country or something along those lines, showing, wow, this place kind of looks like a shithole, but this is the leading town or city in the whole country. And so that one shows just how at what point the whole world is like. And two, that line about we stopped trying to solve problems and just tried to survive them gives a much more global sense. So one line shows what the country is at, the other line shows what the world is at, without ever having to show any footage of that. So
I think it was worsened a little bit for me, just the fact that there was a solid 5-7 minutes of him monologuing.
Yeah, well, and that goes to the exposition thing, which I think
that was a
it's
little bit
exposition
too much.
heavy, but it's all information you need to know going in. And so that's why I think the first time it didn't bother me at all, because it was all crucial information, and I was just, soaking it in so that I could understand the movie. And then the second time it stood out a little bit more because I already knew all the information.
Yeah.
But it's not going to bother me. I'm not going to watch it for the third, fourth, fifth time, sit there and be I can't get through this beginning part because it's all exposition. That's not going to happen. It's going to be something I understand why they're doing it. So
yeah, I also understand. It makes sense, and I think it works. I just think it could work better.
Yeah, I can see that, but I thought the movie we got was really good. So, I mean, yeah, it could have been worked, but again, going back to what we were saying, it's nitpicky stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I thought everything should be prefaced by I thought this movie was great.
Yeah.
This is something that could have made it greater, but not something that made it bad.
Yeah. Matt, do you have some negatives?
Not really negatives. There are little things. The fact that the group is called the High Five was sort of just, it wasn't really they didn't really show them or say how they got the name. Well, how they got the name, but it wasn't really established that was where they're called. It really just sort of came in, unless I missed it. It was just oh, look, it's the High Five, and you have to oh, what's the High Five?
I thought especially because they talked about how he wasn't in a clan and he didn't believe in that. When he was just suddenly in a clan, it was very jarring for me.
It wasn't really a clan. It was more of the high. It was they were working together, but it was more they were just the top 5 people on the board.
The first time I saw it, the High Five, the actual name, I didn't pick up on that until the very end
Yeah.
with Og. But then the second time, I realized they sprinkled it in a couple times.
Yeah.
I mean, it still could have been a better thing where they could have made that more clear.
Yeah.
But it doesn't actually just come out completely out of nowhere. It's said a few times throughout, but you don't really truly pick up on it until the very end.
Yeah. No, it's not like something that like drastically changed, or like
No.
the fact that what their posse's name was doesn't really matter. It's just something I noticed. I thought was a little weird.
My other the other biggest of my negatives, because I have a few other very very small things, but another one of the kind of story plot negatives that I had, I felt like the exposition of their relationship, Parzival and Artemis, I feel like felt very rushed in the movie. I felt like it was definitely supposed to be rushed to a degree because it was Parzival saying "I love you," and she was like, "No, that's just because I'm famous and we're in a game." And so it was definitely rushed to a degree in the book. It just felt like kind of like they met once and then suddenly he was telling her that, and I think they could have either taken out the relationship or made them have a rough friendship or something like that, or just added in a little bit more, intimacy or conversation between them before he said that.
I could see them adding more to it to flush that out a little more. I liked that there was a relationship between them. I wouldn't want that cut out because I thought that added a lot to their characters, and I thought added a lot to the movie. And I thought that really worked for the story they were telling. Usually when a relationship between two characters or character development in general is rushed, that's something I pick up on while I'm in the theater. I'll be sitting there and, if I feel like, oh, this moment between these two characters doesn't feel earned, I don't feel like they've naturally gotten there due to the relationship they built up, that's something I think about while I'm watching the movie. With Ready Player One, it's something I hadn't even considered until after I saw the movie, upon reflection. So it is something that could have been improved, and it's something they could have worked on, but I don't think it's necessarily a fault of the film, and I definitely wanted them to be together ultimately. I wouldn't have wanted them to cut out the relationship angle period. I wanted that to happen. It could have been fleshed out a little bit more, could have been built up a little bit better, but ultimately I was fine with the way it ended up going.
I think part of the reason that I say that they could have cut it out is because having read so many young adult novels similar to this dystopian future, people going on a great adventure to try to change something about the world, I find that a lot of those, a lot of the stereotypes and the archetypes of the young adult novel include while this person is saving the world, they find a romantic interest that is the same age.
I understand that. Yeah. It feels a little bit cliched, but at the same time, there is a familiarity to the story.
That's true.
And I think, yes, you have all this added stuff of the Oasis and references and all that, but at the same time, it feels like a familiar story that we've seen before at its bare basics. And so having that kind of love relationship makes sense.
Yeah.
And I liked it for that reason.
It's expected.
Yeah. And I don't think playing into cliches is always a bad thing. And I think this is a case where it worked.
Yeah. Especially since it is in the book, I feel like there'd be more people upset that it didn't happen.
Well, I don't think the reason you keep it in there is because it's in the book.
Yeah.
I think it's because you can make it work for the film. And I thought, yes, it could have been better, but I think it ultimately worked for the film that we got.
Yeah. I can see why you would say that. That my main issue is not that it's there, it's just that it feels rushed.
I can see why you think you're right, but
but you're clearly wrong.
And another thing that I'm thinking of off the top of my head, this one's very nitpicky, very small visual thing. I didn't like that their eyes were so big, specifically Artemis. Her eyes were huge, and it was uncanny for me.
I mean, if that bothers you, that's your thing, but I think it's a non-issue.
It's just a character design thing. I think if their characters were slightly closer to normal people, Artemis felt thrown off from a normal human being just enough that it was strange to me.
You've never taken a character creator and just slid it all the way to the side.
That's what they did with the eyes.
Exactly. Everyone does it.
Yeah.
And it's there. It's like them. Like the whole idea is that you can be exactly what you want to be. So like,
I don't know.
it's what they wanted, and it's like.
I know that they can be exactly what they want it to be, but when the director designs a character, it should be exactly what I want it to be because I'm watching their movie.
Mm-hmm. Going back to what I was saying, it can't be exactly what you want it to be. We've come full circle.
Steven Spielberg didn't call Connor and made sure it was all okay with
when you get the director's commentary, Steven Spielberg's like, my one regret is I did not call Connor Murphy. I should have consulted him about the eyes. You know, every time I watch this movie, I think, why did I not call Connor about the eyes? That just throws this whole thing off.
Spielberg wakes up in a cold sweat. The eyes. I gotta call Connor right now.
Yeah.
It was just a dream.
Did the eyes bother either of you at all?
No.
I think I talked to you guys before about how much I like their representation of the characters better, because when I was reading the book, all I could think of was Spy Kids 3. And they all looked like they were from Spy Kids 3. And they're just people in weird bulky suits, and that was the image I saw first, and I couldn't shake it the entire time. But now I have these really cool characters and weird fish lady and weird
I do have to say,
guy.
The eyes for Parzival were a little bit bigger. Like, they were not human-sized, and I liked them. It was Artemis's eyes specifically that were just a little bit too big.
I think when I saw her the first time on screen, I think, like, I was like, whoa, those are some big-ass eyes. But then it didn't stick with me. Like, I just got over it.
Yeah.
It was like a fish or a lizard kind of eyes.
Yeah.
Those are some goddamn pancake eyes. But you just get through them.
Yeah.
So.
I liked when he put on the disguise or whatever. That was very cool.
The effect of that, like how he would like take it off.
The Superman glasses.
Yeah, Superman.
Oh, well, yeah, that too.
The Clark Kent glasses.
Yeah, they're like, oh, it doesn't change your appearance, but no one knows who you are. I was like, it just plays into that kind of running joke about Superman.
Yeah,
I thought it did little things like that throughout the film, which would not specifically just with Superman, but with other properties as well.
Yeah,
like it just played on different running gags. Another negative that I have, which it's kind of hard to talk about as a negative because I understand why this couldn't happen. But before the movie, we learned that Disney had not, and maybe I don't know all the details of this story, so I could be not using the correct information. But as best as I understand it, Disney did not give Warner Brothers permission to use any Star Wars stuff in the film, visual stuff. So I think in the film you had two references. Someone referenced the Millennium Falcon, and then Halliday referred to Parzival as his Padawan, and that was it. But there was no visual Star Wars stuff. Other than those two things, you had no verbal references. Which I understand why they couldn't, because Disney didn't give them the rights to. But what bothers me about that is that the logic of this world is that Halliday was super influenced by 70s and 80s pop culture. And that is what shaped the Oasis. And so, in reality, if this was really happening, Star Wars was not one of the biggest.
Yeah.
Like, the single biggest influence on late 70s and 80s pop culture. That was the biggest thing. And so if this were the case, that the Oasis is built on 70s and 80s pop culture, Star Wars would be everywhere. Everyone would have the Millennium Falcon. Everyone would have TIE fighters. Everyone would have a lightsaber. People would be Darth Vader. That would be huge in this world. Star Wars would completely take over this Oasis. And so, especially with the resurgence of Star Wars now, which would have still been playing into this world, going into 2040, whatever. So, it's just, I understand why they didn't have a lot of Star Wars stuff in the movie. That makes sense. I understand that. That's no fault to the filmmakers at all, because they just couldn't do it. But from a logistical point of view, it doesn't make much sense that there is no Star Wars there. Yeah. So it's something that just bothered me a little bit. It's not a big deal at all. But that's something when you start thinking about the logic of it, that's something that should be there, and it's not. So
There wasn't any Marvel characters either, was there?
no, but if you,
I'm probably guessing that's the same reason.
yeah, it's the same reason, but I think that's more understandable because Halliday was inspired by 70s and 80s, and Marvel wasn't really anything then. Yeah. Star Wars was the biggest thing then, and so it would make more sense for that to be there.
This is sort of an issue that I hadn't really thought about until you just said that. The nature of the references and of the pop culture in the movie, I feel like were very different from how they were in the book. You had in the movie there were a lot more, spanning from 70s and 80s to modern day references, and just kind of a lot of pop culture references that would be understood by the audience very well. And while I do understand that, and while it does make a lot of sense, and I think the movie did not suffer from having that, and it was a good decision to have more of those than the book did. It just kind of fleshed out Halliday's character more. He had this, deep obsession with this like nerdy 80s culture that, not everybody else saw. So there were references in the book that were, things everybody knew. But at the heart of what he was really into, it was stuff that not everybody would know. And it added a little bit to how much research Parzival had to do and how much he had to know about these weird out there things. Yeah. And it further established Halliday's character as this geeky outcast kid, more than just a kid who was obsessed with the 80s.
Yeah, and I mean that could have been really cool to go in depth with and to explore more. But then you're just getting into, there's only so much time you have with the movie.
You'd have to explain each.
Yeah, and there's some stuff you have to cut. Yeah. And so I thought we got a really good amount, or I should say we got a sufficient amount of character development with Halliday. Mm-hmm. It wasn't too little that I felt like we were missing stuff, but it wasn't too much. Mm-hmm. I think, the stuff you're explaining would have been really interesting, and I think it would have been beneficial to the character, but then you would have had to cut something else out of the movie, which I think the way the movie is right now is pretty good. Mm-hmm. Or really good, I should say. Yeah. So if you add that in, you got to take something else out, and I don't know what you're going to take out to accommodate that. Or if it's worth taking something else out to accommodate that. Mm-hmm. Something that has already been sufficiently explained, which it could have been explained more, and it would have benefited that specific aspect. But is it really worth cutting something else out to accommodate that? Yeah. So then you're just looking at, that's just editing decisions, if they even filmed that. Yeah. Which I don't think they did.
Probably. I think it was probably decided very early on that these challenges are going to be things that are universal to a degree.
All right. So moving on to final thoughts. Matt, what are your final thoughts on Ready Player One, and what is your score for the film out of 5?
Ready Player One is exactly what I wanted it to be. Like I said, I remember hearing about it years ago, and I'm happy to say that it lived up. Overall score 4.9 out of 5. Always room for improvement.
Of course. Yeah. Connor, final thoughts?
I would say this movie wasn't quite exactly everything that I wanted from it. It achieved the overall goal that I wanted it to, which was to be a fun adventure movie with most of the themes that I wanted from the book. The large overarching themes missed one of them, but it wasn't that big of a deal. And I thought including that would have stretched out the movie or made everything too sparse, made everything feel rushed. And so the choices that were made worked. Felt like the movie was about a 3.7 out of 5.
All right. I love the movie. I come from a different background because I never read the book. Experiencing it, I thought it was a visual marvel. It's not something I get to say about movies I've seen in theaters, but this is unlike any movie I've ever seen. It's just so completely different, and the things they accomplish visually is just staggering. I loved it for all that. Great performances, really great cast. We didn't even get to talk about Ben Mendelsohn as the villain. And I thought he was excellent. I thought he was really good, and he's one of my favorite villain performers. He does a really good job with these kinds of roles, so I'm glad he got that. So great cast, great performances all around. I thought they did really great character development. It had a very strong narrative and driving narrative. It had a lot more profound themes and messages than I was expecting it to. And it was an aspect of the film that really spoke to me, and it took it from just being a fun movie that you watch and enjoy to actually having more substance to it. And it kind of balanced out the style and substance. And I thought Spielberg did an excellent job bringing this movie to life, bringing these characters to life in this world, and explaining it in a thorough way that makes sense and that you're going to be able to understand it as someone who hasn't been exposed to it prior to this movie. So, very few nitpicky negatives. Overall, really loved it. I've seen it twice. I'd go see it a couple more times in theaters. If I have the time, I'll definitely buy it on Blu-ray. So I'll give it a 4.5 out of 5.
Awesome.
All right. So that's going to conclude our Ready Player One spoiler discussion. Once again, I'm your host, Nathanael Molnár, and to my left, I was joined by Matt Smith.
Yep, it's always a pleasure.
Thank you for coming. And Connor Murphy.
Thank you guys for having a good conversation. Thank
Yes.
you for listening to me.
Yes, it was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. We have to do more of these spoiler
Absolutely.
discussions for big films. I really enjoy doing this.
Yeah.
So go over and check out themovieparadise.com. There you got movie news, reviews, editorials, interviews, pretty much everything you could want within the movie sphere. Once again, I'm Nathanael Molnár. Thank you for joining us, and be sure to check out any subsequent spoiler discussions in the coming months. Thanks, everyone.